Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Cary Fukunaga from the film Beasts of No Nation, moderated by Michael Ordoña from the Los Angeles Times Envelope, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
Hello. Thank you for staying, guys. Usually we have a big fall off, but this is a full room.
People running in terror after that. So I'll ask him a few questions and turn it over to you. I want to start where we started when we talked before about the topic of child soldiers. Now, you've said that you first became interested in it when you were in university. You were studying history and political science, and you studied resource conflicts, which got you into the topic. But this odyssey to make the film took like 15 years or something. So what haunted you about it that made you stick with it that long?
I've been asked that question a lot on the press tour. It's tough to identify one reason to stick with a subject. I think I go back to the moment I experienced it more specifically actually on Sin Nombre, which was I was traveling with immigrants across Mexico, and I reached a certain point where I had accumulated so much information, so many personal testimonies, that it switched from just being something that I was investigating and researching to something that I felt somehow responsible for telling the story, because so many people had shared their personal lives with me, and they'd been so generous in that sense, that for me just to take those things and not do anything with it felt wrong. And I think it was kind of similar with this. After so many years of doing research, and not that I was consistently doing research, but returning to it and updating sort of my script, I think it just reached a point where I just felt there's no way I could ever not do it. So it was just a matter of finding out when I could.
I'm sure that the audience is going to want to ask you all about your remarkable leading man. His performance was pretty amazing, right? I'll let you ask that question, but I'm going to jump ahead of that to how he's handling the press tour. How's he doing with all of this, since it's totally new to him?
I think some days he's like excited again about it, and then some days he's like, I have to answer that question again. And for any of you guys who've been on a press tour before, you answer the same question about 30 times a day, every day, several days a week. And he gets days off and everything, but I think it's tough. You know, he needs to be around kids, and he's out of school right now, and he misses his friends in school. So in that sense, I think it's tough, but then he gets excited traveling to different cities and different countries, and I think he's having a good time with it. So there's that side of it too. I tried to make him have Japanese food last night, which didn't go over well. He's a straight chicken and rice guy, and he's stubborn about it. Yeah.
You didn't give him sushi, did you?
I wouldn't even try. It was chicken, grilled chicken still.
The question is that True Detective was shot on film, apparently, and this was shot digitally?
Mainly budgetary. This was a low-budget film, and the logistics of shooting on film for this one would have meant we wouldn't see dailies for a couple days, because we would have to then ship them to the Capitol and CRAW, fly them out to a lab, wait for those dailies to be completed, and we're in a place where there really isn't very strong internet connections. So to actually see the material, we'd actually have to fly back hard drives or discs. So it could be up to like 7 to 10 days before we'd see material. And if there was anything wrong in that period of time, we couldn't go back to reshoot it. So digital was the sort of the most practical means to know that every day, whatever we had succeeded in getting, we knew we absolutely had it. And actually, I have some of my camera crew here, don't I? Where y'all at? Stand up, stand up. Jesse, Ross, yeah.
The question is about the casting process, how they got the young performers.
So once we knew we were shooting in Ghana, which was its own struggle to be able to get the financiers to sign off on it, we would definitely be trying to use as much of the Ghanaian film industry as we could, but it's not as large even as it is in Nigeria. So we knew we'd have to cast outside of that. And we had some casting calls initially, but we weren't getting enough people to come in. So we started sending people out. We had local casting director or casting scouts along with our casting director to go out in the community, find kids like on soccer pitches, every school we could think of, civic centers, church groups, orphanages, anywhere where kids were gathering essentially to see if we can find kids that were charismatic and sort of came alive on camera rather than shrinking away. And Abraham was one of those kids we cast, and we assembled about 30 or 40 kids that we selected out of several hundred, I think about 600 or 700 kids that Harrison saw total, and did a really intensive, very brief acting workshop. And I knew that I would have to cast my leads out of that group. So we ran a lot of different exercises and improvisations that sort of mirrored the script, but didn't require the kids to have to memorize lines, which would have stilted the acting style. And Abraham was sort of the front runner the whole time, but I was running him through the rigors just because I wanted to make sure he was right, because no agu, no film. Mm-hmm. But he was it's pretty extraordinary to find him, because he essentially was playing soccer after school one day, and when Harrison approached him to see if he wanted to be in the movie, he thought he was being scouted for a soccer team. So otherwise, he might not have shown up.
I'm really impressed with the character arc he showed, how he dealt with all of those different pieces he has to encounter. I wonder how you were able to approach some of those very difficult subjects with such a young actor.
Well, first, he had to be. We explained to him everything that happens in the story, and his parents, so they knew the darker things that happen within the screenplay. And then once it came down to the nuts and bolts, shooting for the more violent scenes, for example, which I think you're asking, it's quite technical. So even if it seems like it's quite violent on camera, or when it's edited together on screen, when you're actually doing it, it's not so. And between takes, the kids are laughing and joking, and then we have to get them to focus to play serious. But that's fake blood, rubber machetes, those kinds of things. In fact, when we were doing the scene where Agu kills his first victim, he was very concentrated, but just prior to that, when we were rehearsing with our stuntman, the kid who plays Striker had hit the stuntman really hard with the rubber machete, but that's because he asked for it. At first, his name is King Kong. He just kind of tapped him, and the guy's like, no, really hit me. So Striker was like, okay. Well, hit him as hard as he could with the machete, and it was so loud that people 100 yards away from where we were setting up the shot were like, so Abraham was actually struggling to be serious in that moment. So
I hope the stuntman was okay.
He's a strong guy.
How were they able to fund a movie that doesn't exactly sound like box office gold?
Well, we would have made it 10 years ago had it been easier. It was independently financed. I'm not sure if you noticed how long that list of EPs are. Funding as low as $100,000, from some people, or even lower, actually down to $50,000, on up to $1 million, just to put the budget together. And we originally scratched together 4.3 to make the movie, but by the time we got to Ghana, it was already 5 due to actualized costs. And by the time we finished shooting, not due to me overshooting, because we certainly didn't shoot any longer than planned is, it was already up to 6. So we had to convince those financiers to cough up 50% more than they'd initially, considered investing in it. But we showed them footage, what we were doing and what he had accomplished up to then, and I think that was a big help, because they saw that there was a real movie here. And then, I guess, thanks to Netflix, it definitely paid off.
Yay, Netflix. When did Idris get involved, and how did it change the story?
Idris got involved about a year before production, so what was that? Spring of 2013. In fact, I talked to him the day we were shooting the long shot take in True Detective. We had a brief phone meeting, and kind of explained to him what I wanted to do with the character, because it wasn't fully fleshed out yet in that first draft, and I hadn't really touched the draft except for cosmetic things over the previous 8 years. And told him what I wanted the character and sort of the more of the political context I wanted to infuse in the story. And he sort of trusted me and signed on to it before I had made any of those changes. But I'm kind of like, I'm cautious. I wasn't sure if he was really going to do it until he showed up in Ghana. But he was also helpful in terms of getting Ghana, because we both, including Uzo Iwala, the writer of the novel, we wanted to shoot in West Africa, and we needed an English-speaking African country to shoot in. And Nigeria was off the table due to half of Yellow Sun having production problems. Liberia and Sierra Leone weren't insurable, and so Ghana was the last option. And luckily, we were able to convince the bond company, which most films now have to be bonded, which just means insured. The bond company approved it. So, but Idris found people within Ghana that could help us make sure it happened based on getting access to the military, helping with VAT, value-added tax, in terms of bringing in millions of dollars worth of equipment and shipping it back out again.
What were some of the challenges shooting in Ghana?
Rain, you didn't know when it was going to end either, so it wasn't like you could just turn on your AccuWeather and say, well, this storm will blow over in 20 minutes. It could be there for 20 minutes or for the rest of the day. So scheduling became very difficult. We were shooting in a region, it's not really a tourist region at all in Ghana. It's more of an industrial region, but there was really only one hotel, and we needed basically every room in that hotel for our crew. And then when you're making a movie, the most basic things you need are transportation, lodging, and food. You can bring pretty much everything else. And those three things alone were quite difficult. So every day was full of challenges, definitely. It was definitely rewarding. I mean, we had it was a very cross-cultural crew as well. So we had a lot of heads of department that were from South Africa, U.S., and the U.K., but then we had a huge Ghanaian crew as well to fill in all the ranks. And that was really interesting, having both cultures coming together and making this movie. It was pretty rewarding.
How has telling this story changed your life?
That's tough. I mean, I'm still kind of just getting out of it. So give me a couple of years to say how much it's changed my life. Just bare level, I had malaria while I was there, so that changed a few things. I brought back another parasite, some amoeba that I just got rid of recently. In fact, did you guys get checked for parasites yet?
Yanchi had a bad one, but he's all cleaned up now.
That was the one that was in his leg, right?
The experience really stayed with you.
Yeah. But in terms of who I am as a person, it's tough to say. I mean, it's very hard to look at those kind of images as I did in terms of the research, especially in terms of the gruesomeness of war, and not to be able to leave that behind is very difficult. And then also just even to stare at the edit of this for a whole year has its own, comes its own challenges as well. But I don't think I've necessarily changed in terms of my sort of internal driving mechanism.
What advice do you have for the U.S. State Department? Presumably regarding child soldiers.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting. We created a deal a few years back where any country that used child soldiers, we wouldn't give them military aid. And under the Obama administration, there's certain loopholes you can use. For example, if we're dealing with terrorism, that will ignore that. And we've been pretty bad pretty much since that bill was issued in honoring the not paying governments military aid who are using child soldiers across the board, and usually through the loophole of terrorism. So the State Department isn't doing anything, actually, to prevent child soldiers from being continued to be used in states that we're actually helping out. And you guys can also do things. If you notice, there was a link in the credits as well in terms of taking part. We are working with IRC and Mercy Corps, and it was important that I didn't think we should just throw money at the child soldier sort of programs. I think you also have to go to root causes for conflicts. And so part of the things we're financing are education and sort of more stabilizing programs in terms of economies.
Considering the challenges of shooting there, what lessons in leadership did you pick up?
Well, I picked up on one thing you said, especially with like the idea of like feeling alone, and you're definitely not alone when you're on a film set, you know, and in terms of support is what I mean. I mean, these guys here were amazing support all the way through it. You know, as a cinematographer, I was right there next to them, and you know, Steve McDougall, you can stand up again. Your team, you ran a great team, supported us all the way through it. Even when other departments were like complaining or causing problems, you know, like he was his own leader as well, and made sure everyone like understood what we're here to do, which is to make a movie and make an tell an important story and not get caught up in our own gripes and grievances. And for my part, I just couldn't really give up. So even when I internally was feeling like we're on some kind of sinking ship, I couldn't ever like give that off to anyone else, you know. So I was just faking it till we made it.
How did you select the composer?
Dan Romer, he made an incredibly beautiful score, I think, for this film. We'd worked together once before on a series of shorts that I shot in Kenya. But he's also a guy I've known for a long time because I worked with the Court 13 guys when they were making their first short, also as a cinematographer. And we'd always just wanted to work together and hadn't found the right project yet. And then this one came along, and it felt like he was the perfect guy to take this kind of story on. And anyone who knows Dan, he's a really sensitive, emotional guy, and really great to work with. But even for him, I think the time that he worked on this and looking at the material and taking it in emotionally was very hard on him. I remember being next to him in scenes where I was actually crying. He was crying as he was listening to the music, you know, and getting emotional with it and taken with it. So he puts a lot of himself into the music. And even though this score is oftentimes quite restrained, given if you think of Beasts of Southern Wild or some of his other work, it's still also, I think, some of his strongest.
Considering how varied your work has been, especially Jane Eyre and this, what draws you to your projects?
It's so hard to say where the attraction to certain stories come from, and I'm hesitant to like analyze it too much for fear of what might be in there. But there's definitely themes that are similar. I think Sin Nombre, Jane Eyre, and Beasts have within them the idea of losing your parents or becoming an orphan or having to recreate family in a different way, and obviously not always in a healthy way or a safe way, but this desire for connection and for the warmth of, you know, the original family.
Do you know what you're doing next?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know. I'm for hire. I'll be posting on Craigslist shortly. I got a few things I'm working on, but after it, stopped being, I hadn't really prepped anything else to be ready to go right away. Like everything kind of takes time to get finished, so I have a little bit of gap right now.
Is the international flavor of some of your work related to your background?
I'm from California. Very multicultural California, but I think that my interest mainly comes because my interest is abroad and world affairs and how we are connected and issues that are taking or conflicts and things that are happening in the world that I think are important or interest me. And so, as coming from a history and a political science background, I like to do a lot of research, almost academically, like a journalist would or any researcher would, on a subject before I approach it narratively or in the fiction world. And I just really enjoy that process. And when I was working on Sin Nombre and spending time traveling with immigrants and learning more about Central American culture and southern Mexico, that was just something I found really rewarding and gratifying. And I would probably continue to do that just because that's the kind of thing I like to do. And so similarly with this project, even though we're not naming any one particular country, and as Uzo, the author, is from Nigeria, and he based it more on Biafra in the book, we also felt it was important, to remain not specific about the country. We still had to pick details from something. And the conflict I knew most was the one in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So then that's what I used for my original research. And then we also still used cultural elements of Ghana because that's where we were shooting. So we used Tree, which is a pretty predominant language within Ghana, as Agu's main village language, even though there's never been a war like that in Ghana.
Can you think of any war films that were influential to you?
There's a ton of war films. It's hard because you don't want to copy any war film. You want to make your own version of it. You want to do the version that you see in your mind. But it's hard, and also because of the language of war films, not to echo some of those as well. I think Paths of Glory, in some way, was definitely in there. We nowhere near had the time or money of something like Apocalypse Now, but obviously you can't talk about a story that has a Heart of Darkness element to it and not think about Apocalypse Now. And Thin Red Line, Platoon, Tropic Thunder. So,
Cary Fukunaga, thank you very much.
Thank you.